It's a big week to be a part of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church cult as they find themselves back in their news this week with 1, 2, 3, 4 articles, I think, so far we've had on their cult schools. The Guardian is currently doing an investigation into their schools, not only for their funding, but the way the schools are run. There was an article you may have seen where they did a bit about my time in that school and how, as they quoted, it was one of the darkest times, and which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of now from following my journey on exposing this cult. So it's good to see that it's getting some traction, and whilst I'm not the only one sharing the story, I'm just going to talk about what I've seen in these articles and my experiences on them. One of the articles that happened this week was about the surveillance in the Brethren schools, and whilst you might think, okay, yes, well, every school, why wouldn't a parent want their kid to be under surveillance and protected? This goes a little bit deeper and a little bit more sinister than the average, surveillance camera in the schoolyard. There are surveillance cameras everywhere. I remember even at the school I used to be at, there were surveillance cameras leading up to and even in areas of the bathroom, which look back now is kind of questionable, given the fact of this, that it's not a teacher or the ladies in the front office sitting there watching surveillance. Yes, that happened. But there is a whole network set up outside of that where essentially you've got community members monitoring cameras on a daily basis. You've got them monitoring children using laptops on a daily basis. Anything that triggers a search word like the word gay, or immediately they get alerts for and the family are notified, and there's meetings around this child's behaviour, be that a search word, be that their behaviour in the school, all monitored from this little network of church cult members, keeping surveillance on the kids. That's this article, which, I'm drawing my knowledge as well and putting it into what I can pick out what's been sort of laid out in this article. The next article is why exclusive Brethren schools net almost 30 million in disadvantaged payments. So much to unpack here, and I have been asked to come on board with Get a Life to do which is a great podcast on this cult, Get a Life podcast. If you want to look them up on YouTube or give them a follow on their socials, it's just Get a Life podcast, where cult members come in to share their stories like myself. You see it here. They have the families at One School Global New South Wales have a medium taxable income of $302,000 a year, whilst those attending schools have in Victoria, Western Australia, Queensland, from 172 to 184. So and in comparison, the median gross household income across Australia is 92. Let's just say, and I've said it before, they're wealthy. They are wealthy people. So moving on. And as the article, further to this, the article says these schools are amongst the wealthiest in Australia. Based on student recurrent income, it ranks in the top 200 of the country's almost 10,000 schools, placing in the top 2% of schools nationally. So government funding aside, these schools are wealthy. And there's more information in this article to back up the fact of how much money or liquid cash assets collectively this school has. And you've got financial reports that have been lodged with the charity regulator show that One School Global has more than 200 million in net assets, combined with surpluses of 26 million in 2022. And then it goes on to explain that the analysis of federal funding disclosure for private schools shows that the federal government paid One School Global across all of Australia a total of 136 million from 2018 to 22, with 28.8 million provided through the disadvantaged loading. Now, this is the important part that I want to talk about, because these are very, very wealthy families who claim that 90% of their students are in the bottom quartiles. That means that they are disadvantaged, and then therefore they get more money from the government because they are a disadvantaged school. Now, how that works is not purely based on income. It's obviously based on education of the parents, because when you look at it in a wider, more diverse Australian group, there are schools that have more disadvantaged kids, meaning that they could come from a family of First Nations people where they were and have been disadvantaged, not by choice, right? And this is the point I want to make. One School Global students aren't disadvantaged. It's a choice not to send your kids to university. Therefore, their parents don't have education. Therefore, it affects how they're placed in this whole system of government funding, of how much money they get. You can't claim disadvantage when you're choosing the disadvantage. We were not allowed to go to university. Kids are not allowed to go to university. Therefore, my parents don't have education, nor did I, and nor would my children if I was still in there. So this generational disadvantage that they have is but a privilege, because they are extremely wealthy, and yet they are claiming this disadvantage. And you'll see from these graphs how they've realized that they're obviously making money off this, and then have tried to, and I've got both sides of this story as being a member and now seeing it in the big picture. So I know somebody that used to work for One School Global, UBT, in that area, and they used to have to instruct families on how to enroll. And you were told you had to enroll, and taught how to enroll and taught how to put down what you did in terms of dulling down your career so that it didn't look like you earned as much money. But on the flip side to that, and ATO if you're listening, or NESA, the Department of Education, you need to do a full-fledged investigation into this, because there are some loopholes, and these people have found it. So and it happened, so my parents would split their income. Not only are they splitting the income between the husband and wife to reduce their total income as a trust, I guess you could call it, as a family unit, so they pay less tax there. They are also, on the other side, with their students being taught how to enroll to look like they earn less, and essentially they are, because they're showing that by splitting the income. And then also on top of that, they can claim the disadvantage that they are not educated, because a part of that low socioeconomic status, whatever it is, governed by, a lot of it comes from education, which you can understand. Like, you think about the First Nations people, they come from a long history of actually being disadvantaged for education. So it makes sense that it's only right that they are afforded this. Yet on top of this, you've got a very wealthy group rorting the system on both ends. They are robbing Peter and Paul, essentially, for money. And this is how insidious this cult is. And there needs to be a fully fledged investigation into this. Like, I'm just pulling this together from being there and then seeing someone do an investigation into it. This is just my limited knowledge, so to speak, and experience. There is a whole lot more. There are a whole lot more members that could share stories that would validate this and back this up, because I'm sort of just pulling together what I know, and then also what I've heard from teachers and former students and former members that worked at One School Global and UBT, which are the brains behind that's how to evade tax, essentially. But stay tuned. This week we'll take a deep dive into this with the Get a Life crew, and unpack essentially using also what we've been through and our stories and experiences with the actual research that's been done in this investigation. But if you're listening, NESA, if you're listening, Department of Education, with the tax authorities, you guys need to do something about this, because they are not disadvantaged people when disadvantage is not a choice. They, in fact, are privileged people, predominantly white, might I add, that are ripping and rorting the system, and it's our taxpayers' dollars. I mean, we all have to fucking pay tax, so why shouldn't they pay just as much?